Blink while driving on US Highway 24 and you might miss the tiny town of Kentland, Indiana. It's surrounded on all sides by miles of cornfields. Its population is just 1,828. But that hasn't stopped it from opening its very own bank, America's smallest bank, in fact, with $3 million in assets. Kentland Federal Savings and Loan was established in 1920, survived the Great Depression, and over 100 years later still does all of its business in person, on paper. There are no fees, no ATMs, and certainly no computers. Deeds are stored in a cardboard box at the back of its only branch. You can open a savings account with one $5 bill. And believe it or not, Kentland Federal isn't even the town's only bank. There's just one McDonald's, one bar, and one gym, but there are 3 banks, plus a drive-up ATM. And Kentland isn't alone. It seems there's no town too small or too rural to have its own bank. Oakwood, Texas, population 400, has one. Elmore City, Oklahoma, with 600 people, has 2. In the tiny hamlet of Bird in Hand, Pennsylvania, home to 537 people, the bank will even come to you. The Bank of Bird in Hand caters to its Amish clientele with a fleet of buses, not to mention horse-drawn buggy-friendly parking. It now holds $1.8 billion in assets. The United States is littered with banks, well over 4,000. No other country comes close. Russia, in second place, has 402, the UK 311, and China 193. And those are just the banks. The number of US branches is 78,299. Partly, this is just a quirk of history. Until the 20th century, banks were only allowed one self-contained location, no branches. Even then, they were generally confined to a single state. Only since the 80s and 90s have they been allowed to expand nationwide. In other words, they've only had about 30 to 40 years to consolidate. By law, moreover, banks with over 10% of the nation's total deposits are generally barred from mergers and acquisitions. Wells Fargo, Bank of America, and Chase, with 10, 15, and 16% market share respectively, can only expand by opening new locations, not by buying existing ones. But that still doesn't fully resolve the mystery. 99.9% of banks, after all, are allowed to swallow up their competition. And since the 80s, Walmart has successfully conquered most of rural America. Yet we still have thousands and thousands of small-town, family-run banks. Why? And how can the math possibly work out in a place like Kentland, Indiana, where the average income is just $42,000 a year? In a typical month, an American bank will open a median of just 23 new checking or savings accounts and make 5 consumer loans. 23 and 5. Meanwhile, many, if not most of these accounts will hold little more than an 8-year-old's $20 in Tooth Fairy money or a college student's $2,500 in part-time wages. How can this possibly justify an expensive commercial lease on a prime Main Street corner, staffed 40 hours a week by white-collar bankers? Never mind 3 leases in a town of 1,800 people. Sponsored by Ground News, the tool that helps you cut through the noise and understand how news is being reported across the spectrum. At their core, banks earn money like everyone else, by buying low and selling high. First, they buy your deposits as cheaply as possible, and the absolute cheapest money in the world comes from checking accounts. Who else, besides the owner of a checking account, will hand-deliver you cash on payday and only charge you 0.07%? These are virtually free loans. A bank's second favorite kind of money are savings accounts. Here, they pay you a little bit more, but by restricting your access to this money, by limiting the number of monthly withdrawals, for instance, they ensure it's available longer, allowing them to more safely lend it out. And that, of course, is the second part of the formula: selling high. Banks turn around and sell your deposits to borrowers at a much higher interest rate. The average 30-year home mortgage now costs about 6.5%. That difference between what they pay for your money and what they can earn from it is called their net interest margin. You can start to see how even a tiny bank can keep the lights on. 6.5% minus 0.07% is a lot of percent, especially when multiplied by millions of dollars in deposits. Now, the problem for banks is that they have very little control over either side of this equation, the rate they pay or the rate they earn. With 3 banks in a town as small as Kentland, Indiana, they have lots of competition. That leaves one big lever they can pull: costs. Ruthlessly managing expenses is one of the few ways a bank can truly stand out. This is why if you walk into a branch with an issue, especially at a giant like Chase or Wells Fargo, there's a good chance your banker will then proceed to pick up their phone in front of you and call customer service. It's much cheaper to have one centrally located back office than to maintain experts on demand at every branch. It's also why your bank really wants you opting in to paperless statements, sometimes even requiring that you do so to earn a one-time new account bonus of $1, $2, or $300. You might think sending a letter in the mail costs virtually nothing on the scale of a multi-million-dollar business. But you'd be wrong. This is one of the few things in a bank's control, and they're not about to waste it. Not least because most of their other costs are large and non-negotiable. Like, for instance, real estate. To attract deposits, banks have to be centrally located, ideally in a busy downtown neighborhood. They're also equipped with expensive drive-through windows, pneumatic tubes, large physical footprints, and ATMs. If you ever need a free place to park, look for a bank. Because they depend on those 23 new accounts each month, they can't afford to turn away that one marginal customer, even at 4:30 on a Friday when everyone else is cashing their checks. That means building an excessive amount of parking in prime locations, 90% of which sits empty for 90% of the week. Remember, most banks are shockingly small. The median branch holds a grand total of just under 3,000 accounts. If even 30 people take their business elsewhere, that translates to a 1% decline in customers. The irony here is that banks fight so hard to please clients who are decidedly not, and will statistically never be, profitable. Many businesses sell a few loss leaders, but banking is unusual in that the median customer earns $0 or even negative dollars. A typical customer might keep $1,300 in their checking account while clogging up the line to the ATM twice a month on payday and will never apply for a mortgage. It's true that many banks charge excessive fees bordering on usury. According to Strategy Core, an average account generates about $107 in service and overdraft fees per year. That's a steep price just to access your own money. But that doesn't change the fact that it costs far more, between $250 and $400 a year according to some estimates, to service a typical customer. So, then, why do banks even bother? Well, for one, because most of their costs are fixed. Real estate and staffing cost much the same whether you have 3,100 or 3,200 accounts. The median account may not be profitable, but it's at least not super unprofitable. Second, banking is a long-term, relationship-driven business. Most people hate thinking about banks, which means they also hate switching banks. There's a decent chance your very first bank will also be your last. The average branch accumulates half the deposits it will ever have in its first 3 years of operation. Meaning, after 3 years, it becomes mostly about keeping your existing customers happy. You might lose money on a checking account for the first 23 years. But if on the 24th year that client applies for a mortgage, it may have all been worthwhile. Think of those first 23 years of losses as marketing. Banks need their community's trust and goodwill, but they also need to ruthlessly cut costs. Sponsoring the local Little League team and servicing everyone, including the super young and unprofitable, for example, are two affordable ways to thread this needle. Now, banking seems like an industry where scale is everything. After all, if you can divide those fixed costs by an increasing number of clients, you can drive down the average cost. Likewise, the larger your network of ATMs, the more attractive you become to people who travel. There's certainly a lot of truth to this. Recall that just 3 companies, Chase, Wells Fargo, and Bank of America, collectively hold nearly half of the nation's deposits. But there are also some downsides to scale. Banks generally offer one uniform rate for deposits across all their branches. Customers in rural areas care more about these rates because deposits represent a sizable share of their total wealth. Those few extra dollars add up. But the Wells Fargos of the world can't offer them a high competitive rate without also sacrificing their revenue in urban areas, where customers don't care whether they're earning 0.03 or 0.3%. Ironically, this means the best deals are often found at small local banks, which can precisely tailor rates to their specific region. It's one of the rare cases where the rich don't get richer. Big banks, meanwhile, optimize for what their clientele care most about: convenience. They invest in better websites, apps, and mobile check deposits. And in cities, they put a branch on every corner. This is why New York City has such a ridiculous number of banks. Just in this quarter-mile radius of Midtown, for example, there are 50 banks, including 5 different Chase branches. In fact, there are more Chase locations across the 5 boroughs than there are Starbucks. New Yorkers really value their convenience. Even an extra block or two matters when you're on foot. Finally, another thing smaller banks do better are debit cards. To simplify, when you buy something from, say, Costco with a credit or debit card, your bank charges Costco a fee. Since 2011, federal law has capped this fee for debit cards at 21 cents plus 0.05% of the transaction. This is why most debit cards don't offer cash back. 21 cents plus 0.05% doesn't leave enough money to split with you, the cardholder. If you want 3% back on restaurants, you have to apply for a credit card, whether or not you need or even want one. That 2011 law, however, made an exception for banks with less than $10 billion in assets. Which means tiny Kentland Federal Savings and Loan can offer you a debit card with, say, 2% back on groceries, while JP Morgan Chase can't. It's a strange and kind of miraculous inversion of how things typically work in America. Here, the law bends over backwards to protect small businesses from their enormous competitors. Drive 3,000 miles across the United States and you'll encounter every climate, every language, and way of life. Yet, the built environment largely stays the same. Whether you're in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, Grants Pass, Oregon, or Meridian, Mississippi, you'll probably pick up your prescriptions at CVS, get your brake lights fixed at AutoZone, and stock up on food at Walmart. Your friendly neighborhood drug, grocery, and bookstores have long been replaced by identical corporations with identical layouts. And when every town has its Dollar General, and every strip mall its obligatory TJ Maxx, they all sorta look the same. Which is what makes the continued survival of small-town community banks so incredible. Somehow, in the year 2026, you can still walk into a brick building with your town's name on it, shake hands with a 67-year-old owner, and sip some coffee or eat some cookies on the house. Of course, modest small-town banks aren't very controversial, and thus, like many things, we don't tend to hear much about them. The news tends to focus on the sensational, giving us a skewed vision of reality. And that's why I partnered with today's sponsor, Ground News, to show you how to escape these echo chambers and see beyond one party, region, or issue. What's great about Ground News is that it not only gathers news from around the world and makes it easily digestible on its website and mobile apps, but you can also explore how different outlets are covering the same story. with visual breakdowns on a source's bias, how reliable they are, and who owns them. Here, for instance, we can see a summary of how the left and right are reporting on the US government's recent restrictions on Anthropic's latest AI models. Over 250 news outlets reported on this story, and I can see each one as I scroll down. The left, it says, characterizes this policy as an authoritarian crackdown, while the right emphasizes national security. I've partnered with Ground News since 2023, and have enjoyed using it to follow news from outside my immediate bubble, the United States. One of the things I try to do with this channel is highlight stories from around the world. Using the app, you can see what stories are being overlooked in your country, along with how these stories are being reported differently across regions. Ground News is fully independent and funded directly by subscribers. Right now, you can get 40% off the same unlimited access Vantage plan that I use by visiting ground.news/polymatter or by scanning the QR code on screen. Thanks to Ground News for sponsoring this video.